Hey guys, Ryan here today. Today I want to talk to you a little bit about the CMA. Kind of the purpose behind this video is to help those of you out there that are working on it or are considering just getting started. This is definitely a presentation that I wish I had had to look at prior to deciding to pursue the CMA. Some of the things I'm going to touch on are sort of maybe the reasons why you should get it, and go as far as specific tactics and strategies that you can use on exam day to pass the exam. A little bit more about me. So I started studying for the exam back in April of 2018. Now it is now about the second week of November 2018. I've completed both exams. So I'm going to take you through my journey, and hopefully this is helpful to you on your journey, what to expect, and how you can be successful with this exam. So without further ado, let's start. Okay, guys. So the first thing that I'll kind of touch on, and maybe some of the reason that you've considered getting the CMA, is the salary related information. All this information here is directly from the IMA's website. The gist of it is basically, if you have a CMA, you're going to earn very likely significantly more than your non-CMA counterpart. I can say that some of the other benefits, and just sort of to repeat what the IMA has already said, is that it definitely creates career opportunities for you, creates market demand for your skills. Certainly, I've been in organizations that very much valued the CMA. A lot of folks in leadership with the CMA. I've seen situations where folks, once they finish a CMA, almost immediately they're recruited into a better position. So definitely a certification worth getting. Next thing, so here I've kind of outlined what were the bare minimum costs for me to get the CMA. It definitely, in terms of the study materials and that sort of thing, can cost more to get the CMA. As far as the actual entrance fee, you've of course got to sign up to be a part of the IMA to become a CMA, and that sort of breaks down into a CMA entrance fee, a processing fee, and a professional membership fee. Now, the professional membership fee, as it stands right now, is roughly around $230, and it's due annually. So that's not too bad. You won't be paying $495 every year, and these other costs are one time also. So it can be at minimum around $2,000 investment if you decide to get supplementary materials and other sorts of things. Can definitely run significantly higher than that. A little bit more in terms of requirements. You have to meet the experience requirement and the education requirement. So in terms of experience, you can see I've outlined or taken directly from the IMA's handbook some of the experience that they're expecting you to have gotten, and this has to be for 2 years for full time. Now, they will accept part-time experience. It does take more experience at the part-time rate to be equivalent to the full-time requirement. As far as the bachelor's degree, this is one thing that is sort of advantageous. At the same time, it's not so advantageous. Is the fact that you only have to have a bachelor's degree in any field to sit for the CMA or to sign up with the IMA. Now, that's, like I said, it's sort of a good thing and a bad thing. It's a good thing to the extent that you don't have to go back and get more education in accounting or finance or business, what have you. But when you get ready to go and take these exams, I'll tell you, and I'll speak to this a little bit later on in the presentation, it really does help to have that foundation I would definitely say you are at an extreme advantage if you have a degree in finance over somebody that has a degree in art if you're both pursuing the CMA. Some additional notes. The CMA is only offered 6 months out of the year, so there's 3 different test blocks. So that kind of puts a somewhat of a limitation on how quickly you can complete it. Just depending on how quickly you can absorb the material and sign up for the test and everything. I will say the test requires significant study time. Some of the information that I've seen is somewhere around 100 and maybe 30 hours for the first exam and somewhere around 100 study hours for the second. I'll say I spent significantly more than that. So I guess it just depends on who you are, and again, if you're coming from a background that's not in business related at all, then it expect to take significantly more time. This is a very difficult exam. You can see the pass rates for number one is 35%, and for number two is 50%. So they are difficult exams if you look at it from a pass rate standpoint. They both consist of 100 multiple choice questions and 2 essay questions. Now with the multiple choice, only about 90 of those count, and the weights are 75 and 25% respectively. And they require you to answer at least 50% of the multiple choice questions that count against you. So effectively 45 questions of the ones that count, and you don't know which ones count, to move on to the essay questions. Now that doesn't necessarily mean that it's not necessarily an indicator of whether or not you've passed, but it's an indicator of whether or not you've passed the multiple choice questions. You'll need a 360 out of 500. That does not necessarily equate to 72%. I did some research on how the IMA sort of calculates that. I don't have really a great answer for you, but just know that you need a 360 out of 500 to pass. And also to maintain the certification, outside of the annual fees mentioned earlier, you will need to complete continuing professional education credits. I'm not sure exactly how many that is. It's something you can simply find on the IMA's website. But just keep in mind you will have to complete that. So on to my journey. Like I mentioned earlier, I started studying full-time in May of 2018. I actually left my full-time position to dedicate myself to this. I was very blessed to be in a financial situation to where I was able to do this. I know everybody can't do that, so keep that in mind. I have completed this in 6 months, but it's because I've been able to commit my time to it. I've had more opportunity there. So I took the first exam after studying for about two heavy months of studying on June 29th. And the IMA, as they say on their website, will return your score to you roughly 6 weeks after the end of the test window, which August 12th was almost 6 months to almost not 6 months, sorry, 6 weeks to the day after the June 29th test, or the June 30th ending date for that particular test window. So that's when I received my passing score. And then shortly after that, say about a week after that, I began studying for part 2, and I took that test at the end of October. Now I'm not sure clearly that I've passed that exam. I will say that I felt much better about that exam. Like I said earlier, it does have a higher pass rate and that sort of thing, and so I do think I did better on this exam, but not quite sure. Anyway, I at least know that I passed the multiple choice because I did do the essays. So anyway, my insights from taking the exam were that part 1 was definitely more difficult. I will say that. So I haven't mentioned yet, but I actually used Gleim study material, and the book for part 1 is thicker than the book for part 2. So that's an indication clearly that there's more material. I'd say it's significantly thicker. I think they have about 13 units of study in part 1. In part 2, there's only 10. So there's and some folks, there's some research out there that I think some folks were saying it took them around 100 hours on average to study for part 2 and 130 to study for part 1. So yeah, definitely, and on top of that, a lot of folks that I've known that have taken it have mentioned that they thought part two was easier. Now, I have met people that have said because part two was more finance geared and they're more of an accounting mindset, that it was more difficult. So, keep in mind that that's not for everyone. Um, but anyway, so the next thing is, like I said, I use Gleim. Um, I will say I believe that Gleim's study questions are significantly more difficult than some of the ones that I found on the exam. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I actually appreciate that because, if you can do something that's much harder, definitely you can do the easier when it comes time. So that was very helpful for me. Some of those Gleim study questions get really involved. Um, I will say the content on both parts, you know, with respect to the positions that I've held, a position within corporate finance for a while, worked in a plant for a while. Extremely valuable information. I wish I had known what I know now after studying for the CMA. I wish I had known that information prior to starting those roles. Not to say that I wasn't very successful in those roles. I just feel like I would have been significantly more successful within those roles. And lastly, both of them, guys, they require a significant time commitment. So I've committed a lot of hours to studying, of course, testing. I've spent 8 hours testing. Um, so significant time commitment. I'm sorry for this being a little blurry. I just wanted to give you somewhat of an outline of what the major topics were from the two parts. So part one on the left. Um, getting a little bit more specific. Some of the uh, topics that you're going to need to know are, with respect to the external financial reporting, maybe, things like revenue recognition and how to classify different securities. Um, as far as planning, budgeting, forecasting, different forecasting techniques, regression analysis, that sort of thing. You will get into some variance analysis, looking at different costing systems, looking at learning curve, and that sort of thing. And it wraps up with internal controls. Oddly enough, I started studying with internal controls. Some of these chapters a little bit do build on each other from in the Gleim software. So maybe you want to go in order with respect to some of them, but I don't think that you have to necessarily go in the exact order that the software is set up. With respect to part two, uh, like I said earlier, this is really more, in my opinion, more finance related. It was much more fun, much more interesting to me. Not to say that I didn't enjoy the first part, um, but it was. I think that I had more fun on part two. Definitely some financial statement analysis, as it says, ratio analysis, looking at liquidity, the liquidity situation of a business, solvency, and profitability metrics and that sort of thing. Going down to the investment decisions. If you're familiar with MPV and internal rate of return and that sort of thing, that was a lot of fun for me. Touches pretty heavily on the capital budgeting process and that sort of thing. I will say that there are some topics that overlap between the two parts, um, and they may not necessarily be taught within one part or another, if that makes sense. Like, for instance, I think I noticed some things that related to expected value, the expected value concept, that were in part two, not really taught in part two, taught in part one. Um, but they just kind of assume it. So kind of going back, I don't know if I mentioned this, but you don't have to take the exams in any specific order. You can take part two first if you'd like, but just keep in mind that that idea that there may be something that was taught in part one that's on part two. Um, you know, Even though they don't make you take it in any specific order. So keep that in mind. Um, so here's some general tips about the CMA. This is something that I think everyone should be told first and foremost before they go and spend any kind of time or any kind of money on the CMA. I don't think enough people are told. Um, Guys, do not start this if you don't have the time to commit. Because if you don't, you will waste a lot of your time and your money. I've seen it happen. Don't want it to happen to you. Yes, it's a great certification, everything. Definitely, you know, put you ahead in a lot of senses, but it's not worth doing if you don't have the time to commit right now. Some people are very busy, maybe you have children, or things going on with your life. Don't start it unless unless you have the time to commit and finish it. The next thing, don't get discouraged. I know this was when I first started studying for it, some of these topics, guys, are really challenging. Um, and there were times I went to bed at night and I was like, gosh, I don't know if I'm going to be able to do this. Um, but I just went back the next day and looked at the same concepts, and hammered and hammered and hammered them, and eventually um, they actually became easy. So don't get discouraged just because you run up on a concept that's challenging. Give it time. Don't give up on it. Just keep banging away. It will eventually come to you. This is really not a test of intelligence, guys. It's a test of commitment. How much time are you willing to put into this? How much of your heart and soul are you willing to pour into this to get this thing done? Um, there's a lot of smart people out there that if you're not willing to put the work in, you're just not going to finish this thing. Um, so anyway, going back earlier, I kind of mentioned this. If you're an accounting, finance, or business major, you're going to have a leg up. I did my bachelor's not in finance or accounting. It was a business administration degree, and then I did my master's as well. Again, not in accounting. It was actually another business administration degree. Um, and a lot of these concepts I saw, and I can only imagine with accounting and finance, you probably even have more of a leg up, because you've probably seen even more of these concepts. So it definitely helps to have that background. And if you don't, then you just be aware that it's probably going to take you more time. I mentioned earlier, if it's going to take 130 hours on average for most of the people that are taking this exam, if you don't come from one of those backgrounds, it may take you significantly more time. Don't let that discourage you. Just be aware of that. Lastly, guys, don't give up no matter what. If you start in and you the first time maybe you fail the test, don't worry. A lot of people are doing the same thing. Um, it's not the end of the world. Just pick yourself back up. Keep your head up. The IMA is going to send you a breakdown of where you went wrong or the areas you were weak in. Look at those things and see what it is that where you came up short, and put your efforts there and try to come back and see if you can't get that thing knocked out the second time. And I'm pretty sure you can, guys. So just stay focused and stay positive, and you can knock this thing out. Some study tips, guys. I strongly recommend that you purchase some sort of software. I personally use Glime. I know Wiley's got CMA Prep. I think Hawk does. Um, when I first started, I'm a little bit, I can be a little bit cheap sometimes. My original thought was, I'll just get on the internet, find all of the information, and I'll put together my own sort of study thing. Thank God I didn't do that. I would have completely wasted my time. You need problems to work through over and over and over again to drive these concepts home. Trust me, I'm a strong test taker. Of course, like I mentioned earlier, I've done the undergrad thing, I've done the master's thing. Um, it's not a matter of, even if you've had exposure to these concepts, a lot of these concepts you still need to go and hammer them in. I'll take it a step further. Even if you're coming off another professional certification, maybe it's a CFA, maybe it's a CPA, I have talked to people, I've done research, reading through forums. Don't think you're going to come in and pass this thing without studying after studying these concepts on those other professional certifications. It's just, for most people, it's not going to happen. The scope and the material within the CMA Some of it may overlap, but some of it is not even on those certifications, and some of it is a lot more in depth. So just keep that in mind. Um, another tip: if you're familiar with certain areas, like I said, I had quite a bit of accounting and finance courses in my undergrad and my master's, and a lot of the concepts I was at least somewhat familiar with. I had not done some of them as in depth as the CMA goes, but for those areas that I felt pretty comfortable, I'd heard of it before, I studied those things last. That worked for me. I really wanted to focus my attention more towards the things I'd never seen or heard of. The next thing is seek to understand the concepts, and don't think that you're going to be able to just rely on memorizing formulas, guys. It's not going to work. You really need to understand um, the concept and the purpose behind what it is it's trying to teach you to be able to pass this exam. Particularly on the essay portions of the exams, it's really more concept heavy. So make sure that you know the concepts. If you can afford to, purchase some supplementary materials. Yeah, I know Gleim has got a package where you can get some videos and that sort of thing. Those things are probably definitely helpful. I didn't use any videos from Gleim. I was actually fortunate enough. One of my employers purchased the audio recordings for me, and so I was able to listen to those when I was laying in bed at night or when I was driving, you know, and that sort of thing. Maybe running in the gym and that sort of thing. So I listened to a lot of audio recordings. I'm telling you guys, if you can afford to get those supplementary materials, that'll be really helpful for you. And the last thing, guys, don't be afraid to use YouTube, particularly with the first part of the exam. There's a lot of folks out there that are covering this stuff in detail and very sufficiently on YouTube. So use that tool there. I didn't use it as much on part two, but on part one, I definitely did. I think there's a guy out there named Ed Spira. Awesome, does an awesome job explaining a lot of these concepts, and really helped me to drive the concepts home and be able to work through the calculations. Just phenomenal job to those folks out there that are putting that content out there to help us get through this thing. So here we go on test day, guys. So once you've signed up for the test, Prometric will give you a call to remind you of your appointment the day before the test. If you're like me, you didn't need that reminder, but they will call you. They expect you to arrive somewhere between a half an hour and an hour early to complete the check-in process. All the folks there at the test center that I went to here in Nashville were awesome. Awesome staff there. Everybody's very polite. Matter of fact, the girl at the front, I think, gave me a stick of gum, which was I don't have that included in this presentation, but guys, if you can get some gum, I think there's some studies that show if you chew gum while you're testing, it really helps. So that really helped me. Anyway, so like I said, there's a sign-in process. You have to sign in and sign out to, from the time you go in to take the test to the time you leave. But also, if you get up to use the restroom or anything like that, or get a snack, get a drink of water, you have to sign out again. This really eats into your time. So if you can, try to avoid doing that. Try to avoid, drinking any kind of a lot of liquid prior to taking your test. So you have 3 hours for the multiple choice and 1 hour for the essay. If you finish the multiple choice early, you can use the remaining time towards the essay. I strongly do not recommend this. I recommend that you use all the allotted time in the multiple choice, and I'll go a little bit further into that later, or actually in this slide. So here we go. Here are test tips with respect to the multiple choice section. First and foremost, guys, develop a test strategy. I would argue that even if you know all the concepts extremely well, you know how to do the calculations, and you know how to do them pretty quickly, if you don't have a test strategy, there might be a good chance that you don't even finish all the questions. So definitely consider developing a test strategy. I'm not going to tell you that you have to use a test strategy that I'm about to tell you that I used, but I strongly recommend, as with any test that you're taking, to develop a test strategy and employ it while taking the test. So first of all, my strategy was basically to answer any of the questions that I had before moving on. Even if I didn't know the answer was correct, basically just to avoid running the risk of not answering a question, because you can only help yourself by putting an answer down. You take your chances from 0 to at least 25%, if you at least mark something down. The second thing I'll tell you is, and extremely valuable here, always determine what the question is asking before you do anything else, i.e., reading the question, or reading the scenario, or looking at the answers, anything like that. Always determine what it's asking, because sometimes what you'll find is they'll give you a load of information, but you really only needed a few pieces of information to answer what the question was asking. Okay, now getting a little bit more specifically into taking a test, my suggestion is that you go through and answer all the conceptual or word problem questions first. So that's any questions within the multiple choice that have word answers. And the reason I say this is these are typically easier, and you want to just go ahead and knock all those out, right? So you want to break this thing up and structure this test to where you're doing word, word or conceptual questions first, and then you're doing your simple calculations, and then you're following up with your difficult calculations. So you want to answer all your conceptual questions, and then mark all the rest of the questions, right? This is one of those tests where you have the mark function. This is a very awesome thing, in my opinion. If you don't know the answer right away, you can just mark it and come back to it later. That's one awesome part of the CMA testing. So the next thing you want to do is, like I said, answer the easy calculation questions. There are definitely calculations on the test that are going to be easier than other ones. And so we're just going to break them up into easy and difficult. So we're going to answer all of our easy questions second, and unmark them as we answer them and feel confident that they're correct. And if you don't feel confident about one, just leave it marked, and then go back a third time and answer all your difficult questions. Now, I'm going to give you a little bit of a mathematical fact about this exam. So you have exactly 180 minutes. So that's 3 hours for the multiple choice, right? So that gives you, if it's 100 questions, you have roughly just north of a minute and 45 seconds that you can allocate to each question. Now the good thing about this is a lot of questions on this exam aren't going to take you more than 30 seconds to a minute to answer. So that leaves you a lot of time build up, and you want to build that time up as much as possible to come back and answer those mid-level to difficult calculation questions. So again here, I'm going to restate. Don't spend a lot of time initially, specifically, more than maybe 1 minute or so, as you move through the questions for the first time. I hear about a lot of people that say they didn't even get through all the questions. Guys, that should not happen to you. I personally went through all the questions about 3 times. So I went from 1 to 100 3 times. That's what you should be shooting for, in my opinion. So, this is very much about time management. So, answer the question and move on if you don't know it right away, and just follow the strategy of being able to come back later and touch those. And I'll tell you, it'll give you this feeling as though you have a better grip on the test, if you will. It definitely gave me that, and I was able to think more clearly because I felt like I had time to think about it. Okay, so in terms of the essay, here are the tips I have for you. Again, read the questions before reading the scenario. Okay, and the reason I say that, a lot of times, I know myself personally and other people that I've spoken with, sometimes we read through things, and particularly when we're speed reading, right, because we were timed, we read through something and we don't even know what we just read. And a lot of the reason for that is we don't have a reason to have read that. So if you'll read the questions and determine what they want you to get out of it before reading the scenario, then it adds purpose to reading it, and you're able to better absorb the material. That's my opinion anyway. So again, the strategy with the essays is there'll be multiple questions on the for each scenario, and there are 2 scenarios for each essay question. you'll want to go through and answer the easy questions first. Okay, there are going to be some, there may be some, I can't say for sure on your test, but there may be some that have a significant calculation involved. I suggest that you skip those and do the easier, one or two word answer questions first and come back to those. That way, when you do come back to those, you know that all the time remaining is dedicated to these problems. That definitely made me feel good and made me able to think more clearly. And guys, being able to think clearly on this test, and again, time management to make that happen are just critical, I believe, to passing it. So if you when you use the Gleim study software, they will tell you bullet points are okay. They're really concerned with the meat of what you're saying and understanding the concepts, being able to do the calculations. They're also grading you on your English, your ability to spell words correctly and be grammatically correct. So, make sure that everything, you go back and review after and make sure everything makes sense and is coherent, that sort of thing. Know your this is where I said earlier, know your concepts. You need to know your concepts on part two. I'm sorry, on both parts. You need to know your concept on part two, but on the essay, part two of the exam, you need to know, on the essay, you particularly need to know your concepts. They want to know that you really understand what it is that they're trying to relay to you within the course of studying for this exam. Show your work. You will receive partial credit. So the worst thing you can do, guys, is leave anything blank. Don't leave anything blank. They want to try to give you points for as much as you know. You're really going to shoot yourself in the foot if you just leave it completely blank. Try to say something. Try to recall something. Hopefully you can recall everything and you ace it. But if you can't, put something out there. And it's okay to be to the point. This is not a typical essay. This is not, if you've been through, of course you must have been through undergrad, and you probably wrote a lot of essays no matter what discipline that you chose to study. This is not one of those typical essays, right? We're not trying to do any sort of fancy writing. We're just trying to get to the meat of what the answer is for the question. So you can be to the point. They're not going to give you extra points for quantity, number of your word count or anything like that. They're judging you on the quality of what you're saying. So it's important that you're to the point, and you answer the question effectively. And again, be prepared for calculation questions on the essay. Don't think that this is just going to be, all words. It's not going to be all words. Or it's highly unlikely that it'll be all words. They're going to want you to show them that you can calculate something out again on the essay. And just make sure you show all your calculations. Make sure that it's coherent. I personally tried to make sure I went the extra step. I didn't want to make any assumptions about my logic within my calculations. Sometimes it looks like it's a little bit overkill, but I think it's important, particularly if you have the time, to be thorough in your calculations so that they can follow you. It's particularly in the event that you may have made an error. Not to say that you will, but if you have made an error, but they can see where the error was within your arithmetic, but you still kind of had the gist of what they wanted you to get, you may receive more points for that. So anyway, with all that being said, I really hope this presentation helped you. I'm sure there's things that I may have left out that you wanted to know. If that's the case, all you have to do is just reach out to me, and I'll try to help you as best I can. There are definitely some more tips that I can give you to make sure that you're successful on exam day. If you have any other questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me if it's specific to any kind of topic on the exam or anything like that. It's still pretty fresh on my mind. Even if it's a year from now, still reach out to me. It may be something I can help you with. I'm sure I can definitely point you in the right direction. So I hope this was helpful for you. Like I said, please reach out to me with any questions, and best of luck on your exam.